This is Christian Book Blurb, brought to you by author and songwriter Matt McChlery. Get a behind-the-scenes glimpse into the lives of some of your favourite Christian authors, hear about their books and faith. Also, why not check out my website, mattmcclery.com. Hello and welcome to the Christian Book Blurb podcast, where we like to encourage you in your discipleship one book at a time. And we do this by meeting some amazing Christian authors and hearing all about their books, their lives, and their faith. Thank you so much for clicking over here and joining me today. I'm your host, Matt McChlery. Now, on today's show, I'll be chatting about a topic that some people might be struggling with, but I still think is a really important part of our discipleship, is our struggles. And we're talking about when God seems gone. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome onto the show the author of this book, Adam Mabry. Hello, Adam.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Now, your book, When God Seems Gone, uses personal accounts to reflect upon and ask some questions, quite searching questions that we can all struggle with from time to time. So can you just tell us what was the inspiration behind writing this book?
Yeah. As you can imagine, it's nothing particularly lovely because to write a book titled When God Seems Gone is not going to be a happy story. My family and I'm the founding senior pastor of a church here in Boston and where I live. And during the time of my ministry and our lives here, just over the last 10 years, my family and I have had a long-term illness inside our family that we've been dealing with. The nature of the illness is such that it wouldn't be appropriate for me at this point in the history of our family to go into super great detail. But let's just say there's been a long-term illness inside our family that's affected both a member of our family and therefore all of us. That has just been super hard, super hard, way harder than we ever thought. And during that time, our faith hasn't been shaken like theologically. It hasn't gone to like how could a loving God, or where is the sovereignty of God and human suffering? Those theological questions and even the experiential outcomes of those theological questions were settled for me long ago. But the brass tacks, the dirt under the fingernails, walking with God when it just doesn't feel like he's very close, is really what the experience has been like, and what the book was really about, and how to deal with the experiential emotional gap of knowing that God is there, but sometimes feeling like he's not, especially in a cultural moment right now where I don't know what it's like for all of the listeners, but where I live, I pastor an enormous amount of university students. And so though I am aging, my congregation is perpetually the same sort of age. And this rising generation has been taught largely to think with their feelings. And so it seemed to me a highly relevant question. What do you do when God feels or seems gone, even when theologically and biblically, he of course is not?
No, really interesting. I guess sometimes we feel guilty for questioning our faith or questioning God sometimes. Do you think we should feel guilty, or is this questioning part of having a healthy kind of faith?
Yeah, I don't know that it's super useful to feel guilty about questions. The questions just sort of present themselves to us, and I'm not sure at all that the Lord requires us to feel, guilt and shame about questions. God's a big boy, if you like. He can definitely handle our questions, and we are not the first people to the first generation or the first people within the history of the church to go, hang on a minute, this feels rather a lot harder than I thought it was going to be, and wait, where did you go? Especially in one's walk with God, because it is just that. It is a relationship that we are experiencing and growing in with our Father. And just like any relationship, especially, one's relationship with one's parents, it matures and changes over time, right? When you're very little, your parents are right there and they're kind of your whole world. And as you get older, your relationship with them hopefully matures and changes, but the way they relate to you also changes. And as God seeks to grow us up, it stands to reason sometimes that he relates to us differently, which can feel bad. But no, I don't think we at all ought to feel guilt about asking the question. If anything, bringing the question, God, where are you? I think is precisely what we're supposed to do.
It's seeking for him in those times rather
Mm-hmm.
than running away from him. Yeah, no, that's good.
Yeah.
And as you said at the start of the podcast, that it's not a happy story that led you to write the book. You also speak in a chapter in your book called "When God Seems Silent." You speak about the critical necessity of lamentation. Could you explain to us what is lamentation? Why is it important?
Yeah. So I'm a musician by training. My undergrad degrees in music. My wife and I were big music nerds, and one of the downsides of being a music nerd is that you can never just enjoy music. You're always thinking about what you're hearing. And one of the things I've often thought about our worship music in the church, particularly in like the evangelical church ever since the last, 30, 40 years, modern Christian music, a lot to love, but most of our songs are in major keys and most of them are pretty happy. And the good part about that is there's a lot to be happy about with the Lord and a lot to rejoice in. The bad part about that is we've lost the art of singing our sadness to the Lord. We've forgotten that an enormous number of the Psalms are definitely in minor keys, definitely the color blue. That we have a whole book in our Bible called Lamentations, precisely to give us language and contours of prayer to take really hard and difficult experiences and emotions to the Lord. Because when you're discipled by, our church liturgies, which I know, sort of in evangelicalism, we don't like the word liturgy perhaps, but we all have them, right? Just the kind of the things we do in church disciple us. And so we're shaped by the songs we sing and the things that we do and the sermons we hear to just sort of have a, 3.5 happy songs, 3-point sermon that all starts with the same letter kind of faith. When we are crashed into by something hard in life, that's not enough. And so happily, we are part of a long, 2,000-year Christian tradition, and 1,500 or so years of Jewish writings before that give us a lot of language for lament. And so the critical necessity of lament is learning how to take the language of the Bible and grieve up to God, not just hold on to it and get bitter at him. Because if we don't express our grief to God in prayer and lament, trusting that like he's really good in the midst of all of our really cruddy circumstances, what we will end up doing is stuffing that down deep inside. And that is just the emotional equivalent of high interest credit card debt. Eventually the bill comes due and it's a way higher toll than if we just dealt with it in the first place. And that's often where I think we end up deconstructing and feeling, terrible. My own experience as a pastor has been a lot that's kind of come around this recent popular, I'm going to deconstruct my faith movement, man, isn't really any original questions about God's goodness or the nature of faith and science. It's just pain, undealt with pain, unpastored pain, unlamented pain. We're not the first people to hurt, but we may be the first people to not really know what to do with our hurt well. And so, yeah, lament is a hugely important part of our discipleship. And happily, the Bible teaches us how to do it if we'll just read the songbook of the Bible.
Yeah. Learning how to express our pain and our grief is very important. And as you say, there is language for it in the Bible. And I guess when you're speaking of sort of modern worship music and songs as well, that's definitely an area where I think you're right. More language needs to be given so that people have the opportunity to express that that grief and that lament. I guess when everything's happy all the time, it also starts to veer towards everyone sticking on their happy mask and going, "Oh, I'm all right, bless you." But actually, they crying inside, and church should be a safe place for you to come to be emotional, to
absolutely
cry, to lament and reach out to God in the midst of your distress, rather than just the happy place you go to smile and sing some good songs and drink some coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's really good. You also mentioned in your book about God being silent. There are times in life where we feel that God might have gone or is silent or not answering our prayers, maybe in the way that we think he should. Sometimes that's part of the problem. But what should our response be in those times when God seems silent to us? How should we respond correctly?
Yeah. Well, I talk about in the book, like, if he seems like he's silent, um, there's an easy answer that might be the case, and like the really complicated answer. The easy answer is like, well, sin, right? So if I'm grievously sinning and I don't feel like the Lord is close, like, yeah, of course. um, if I sin against you or my friend or my wife, and then it feels like my relationship with any of those three parties is not particularly good, like, yeah, no duh. On the other hand, and the more complicated question is, well, if I'm not, or I don't know that I am, if I'm doing my part to follow Christ and he seems silent, then what do I do? Silence is often the gap where the Lord wants to talk to us about something deeper, in my experience. Now, way more spiritually deep men and women have written about this than me. And this is, of course, the tradition of like the dark night of the soul. And there's a lot to be mined here within the Christian literary tradition. But I would just say a few things. One, God is always talking to us in his word, even if it doesn't feel as though he's talking to us like in our inner lives through his spirit.
For our feelings, which is what you were talking about earlier on. Yeah.
Yes. And while our feelings are super, super important, they're only really good at telling us how we feel. They're not good at telling us about what is true. And so we should pay attention to them as a reflection of like what we feel. I'm not advocating for stoicism and like ignoring how you feel. That's just foolishness. But I'm trying to pull us back from the thing inside you and what you feel inside is like the most important thing about you, or even a really highly important thing, or a theologically important thing for you to know things about God. It is merely one data point about you understanding you, but it's a terrible way for you to know God apart from his word. So God's always speaking in his word. Secondly, I would say when God is silent, don't return the favor. Like don't give God the silent treatment. That's not what it's for. Oftentimes, pauses are actually pregnant spaces that are designed to get something like deeper out of you. I've found, and I was just doing this the other day. I was just with a friend on the other side of the country, walking through a forest, talking to Jesus. And I kind of exhausted my list of the things I like to talk about. Like, okay, Lord, I want to pray about my church and like my family and my kids. And, it kind of got through like, my money and like my future and like did all my things. And I kind of felt like, oh, I forgot to, Lord, is there anything you would like to talk about? And there are moments where I think sometimes God is silent because he wants to dig out a deeper kind of prayer and a deeper kind of conversation with us that only him sort of waiting out our prattling on will actually get to. Now, maybe it's just me who prattles on. Perhaps not every listener is like that. But man, I've got a bullet pointed list of stuff I pray. I'm pretty systematic in my just approach to life. Got a calendar, got a to-do list. And I do the same thing with prayers. Got people I pray for and ways I pray. Building your own rule of life is very popular right now. I do all that stuff. That's great. But there's a moment where when God's silent and we get really uncomfortable in that, I think God's wanting to draw something out of us that's a little deeper than those things.
In your book, you ask what you call the $1 million question. So that was gold to me. I thought, oh, brilliant. He's asked the $1 million question, so I'd better ask it right back. Which is basically, why does God act so slowly?
God acts slowly. Man, his relationship to time is frustratingly different than mine. It's like when the Lord says, "Behold, I am coming quickly," and the Bible ends, "Yes, Lord, even so, come quickly, Jesus." It kind of ends. Man, your experience of quickly and my experience of quickly do not mean the same thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, oh, okay. I suppose when you've created stars and galaxies and you have eons to wait for things to happen, your feelings about the word quickly are different than, say mine. God acts slowly because he's making the trillion-year play, and he's doing a trillion things at once. And thinking about things in those timescales does kind of put things in different perspectives. Like, he is not just interested in Adam Mabry's joy at the age of 41 as a pastor in Boston today, like locked in where my life is. He has ordered history from creation to cross and resurrection to consummation. He's ordered history for Adam Mabry's joy 10 trillion years into forever, being distinctly better than the day before. And so all of his plans and all of his providences, and not just mine, of course, but like his people's, and also our joy in him being somehow extrapolated out into his increasing glory. That's wild to me. But it seems to me that while the Bible doesn't give us like high resolution, therefore this is how every domino hits every other domino, it gives us the low resolution information of every plan he makes is kind of working backwards from that, or in reference to the ultimate goal of that's where it's all going. And God gives us these moments of like, see this thing right here? Trust me. And of course, the greatest evidence of that is the cross and the resurrection of, okay, if God can, by willing the death of his son and raising him from the dead, accomplish the salvation of his people, while I don't know why his timing is the way that it is, while I don't know why my family is experiencing, the particular things we've walked through, or maybe some of your listeners have walked through, a layoff or a divorce or, a sickness or whatever. What I do know is, since that's where it's all heading and he's demonstrated his trustworthiness in the cross and the resurrection, he can handle this. And so I'm going to be okay. Yeah. And so it takes us back to that psalm that says, like a weaned child is my soul, like a weaned child with his mother. Like a weaned child is a kid that's figured out, I don't have to have my mom hold me the whole time. Mom can put me down, go handle the other kids or do whatever mom needs to do. And I'm not going to sit here and just cry. Like, I know she's coming back. And so something about understanding God's movement in history centered on the cross and the resurrection allows me and allows us to understand, all right, even when you're slow, and dude, he's slow sometimes. Like, I don't like it. Yeah. I'm not happy about it. But it's slow in reference to his long-term play. I can trust him.
Yeah. Knowing who he is and trusting him even in the slowness. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. And in your book, When God Seems Gone, you map out the anatomy of disappointment. Can you just explain for our listeners what that is? They're going to have to get the book to get the detail, obviously, yeah. But can you just give a kind of general overview of what you mean by this anatomy of disappointment?
Well, I mean, the anatomy of disappointment is mostly to be understood between the gap between expectation and reality, right? Yeah. And so the Bible says that a hope deferred makes the heart sick. And so when we really expect something, really hope for something, and the longer and more intensely we hope for it, when we don't have it, either because of a time gap or because we've just failed to get it, I mean, the wider that gap, either chronologically or, just through failure, the more disappointed we're going to feel. And so if you're hoping for, or your expectations are the perfect family or, great health or an amazing income or whatever, and then something happens to deprive you of that thing you're hoping for, it's not necessarily the case that like you're an idolater. I know sometimes we use the language of idolatry a lot in Christianity, like, oh, that's the thing that you loved more than Jesus. But maybe it is. Or maybe you just wanted it and you didn't want it more than Jesus. You just really did want it though. Let's say it was 33rd in the list.
You were expecting something. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, and it was a perfectly good, reasonable, non-sinful expectation, right?
Yeah.
Like, I sort of expected my body would work the whole time, or I sort of expected like to be upwardly mobile, or like I would get a degree and then come out of university
Or get
and like
married or whatever.
like these aren't bad things, and it doesn't make you an idolater or mean your loves are disordered. It just means you wanted a good thing and it just wasn't time, or and that's just disappointing. And it's really okay to go, oh, I really wanted a thing, and it wasn't a bad thing. It wasn't like you were trying to steal or anything. But either because of a gap of time or a gap of failure or a gap of deprivation, I don't have it. And that's really hard. That's really, really hard. And the wider that gap is, the worse it feels. And so that's how I understand disappointments. Which, the best way to close those gaps is obviously to try and live somewhere between, well, to have like realistic expectations. But I'm a faith guy too. Like I'm a church planter. I help things get started that that you got to show up and believe big for, right? Yeah. So I'm not at all advocating for, therefore set your sights low, don't expect too much. Like, no. God's the God who hung the stars, man. I'm in for trusting God and beating on the doors of heaven. And if we don't get what we ask for, it's because he said no, not because we didn't ask. Like I want to live that way too. So somewhere in the tension of living life with extraordinary trust in God's sovereignty and huge faith, we can rest in the fact that like he's good and he's gonna do what he's gonna do. But as for me in my house, and the way I teach our churches, let's believe really, really big, but then rest, remembering that like when we go to bed, like someone's still running the universe. It's always been God.
Yeah, no, that's great. Now, in your book, When God Seems Gone, you do deal with several different questions, such as things like when God seems unfair and when God seems wrong, as well as some of the stuff we've already been speaking about. So just before we go for a short break, what should we do then when God seems gone to us?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, we want to examine why we feel that way and bring that to the Lord, not let it push us from him. Yeah. If you're feeling frustrated with God, it could be because it just feels like he's not there, even though you know that he is. And so that, like examining that, like, well, why is that the case? What's happened in your life that's made things feel that way? Have you had a series of disappointments? Are you frustrated just kind of where it is? Is it, are there some unmet expectations that you felt like God owed you? Like maturity is knowing what's driving you and driving your emotions, and then figuring out how to bring those before the Lord and entrust them into his hands. And so when God seems slow or unfair or whatever, figuring out why he seems that way to you and then talking to him about it is the stuff of a good relationship with God.
No, it's really good, really helpful. Thank you. We've been chatting with Adam Mabry all about his book, When God Seems Gone. We'll be back just after these, speaking a bit more with Adam about his life and his faith. So join us really soon. If you enjoy listening to this podcast, you can help keep it on the web. All you've got to do is buy me a coffee. Head over to buymeacoffee.com/Matt McChlery to make a donation. There is a link in this episode's show notes. So go on, buy me a coffee today and help this podcast to keep supporting Christian books and authors. Hello, welcome back to the Christian Book Blurb podcast. I've been chatting with author Adam Mabry about his book, When God Seems Gone. Now, before the break, Adam, we spoke a lot about your book and about some of the content within it. This side of the break, we like to have a chat with the author, find out a little bit more about them as a person. So, you've already said you live in the United States. Whereabouts in America do you live?
So I live just outside of the city of Boston, in a little town. We moved here. Actually, we lived in the UK. My wife and I did for quite some time. We lived in Edinburgh, and then moved here in 2010 to plant the church that I now pastor. I'm originally from the States, but we moved over there to help another team plant a couple of churches in Scotland, and then moved back over here. So yeah, we live in a little town just outside of the city.
Yeah, nice. What do you do for fun?
Couple of things. I like cooking, not baking. Bakers are like mathematicians. I'm not that. But I like cooking. But we live in a really old house that was built like in the 1890s, and so I like tinkering with it. My father was a builder contractor, and I've more or less had to like rebuild this house myself because real estate prices around here are very expensive. So purchasing a home here was a miracle in and of itself. But we got in and then we were like, oh, this place is kind of a dump. And we have to redo a lot. So we did. And so between like a healthy dose of self-confidence, calls to my dad, and YouTube, I figured out a lot of it.
Well done.
But I do like construction projects around the house.
Yeah. Great. Speaking of your cooking, what sort of style of food do you like to cook the best?
Well, right now I'm really into making stuff on my Traeger. So I've got this like grill smoker kind of device outside. And so I like figuring out how to make all sorts of stuff. I like to make flatbread pizzas on it are actually really good. But being American, I like, and particularly from the South, even though I live in the northeastern United States, I'm from the South, and so I like to smoke barbecue stuff and like pulled pork and ribs and stuff. That's what I like to do. Nice.
That sounds great. And you've mentioned that you pastor a church. So
I do. Yeah.
I usually ask, what do people do? Is writing the only thing you do, or do you do other things as well? So
yes, no, I definitely do other things. So I am the founding senior pastor of Aletheia Church. Aletheia was planted in 2011 in Cambridge, Massachusetts, right in between Harvard and MIT. And since then we've multiplied and grown, and God has been incredibly kind to us. And so we have 4 congregations now, and I work with an amazing team of staff and elders and pastors, and it's great. The other lead pastors of the congregations, we all write together and preach together, and it's really cool. That church is part of a broader spiritual family across the globe called Every Nation. I teach in Every Nation Seminary, so I'm the professor of New Testament and Biblical Studies for that. And so those are the main things I do aside from
interesting. Writing. I grew up in Africa, and I went to a university in South Africa.
Nice.
And while I was there, the church I went to became part of Every Nation.
Excellent. Yeah, so you went to
a bit of a link. Yeah, I did. It was
nice.
His people back in the day. And
excellent.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you enjoy coffee?
Yes, absolutely. Only good coffee though.
Only good coffee. Have you got like a posh machine in your house? Like
I'm afraid I do.
The actor who advertises it. What's his name?
I mean,
the Nespresso guy. I bet all the ladies listening to this are shouting, George Clooney. They're shouting at the podcast. It's George Clooney. It's George Clooney. Have you got one of those sort of machines, or do you have one where you kind of grind the stuff?
We don't have those. So we have 2 machines. We've got this like Breville coffee pot that like grinds the beans and then makes the coffee, but it keeps it in a carafe, so it doesn't heat it all day. It just kind of keeps it in this like sealed sort of like giant Yeti cup for your coffee. So that's always great. Fresh ground each day. My daughter works at Starbucks, and so for Christmas we got her an espresso. She actually asked for this, so we got her an espresso machine, and so we've like definitely benefited from her bringing her art form home.
Yes.
But we also have like little pour over devices, and I have a vacuum press. I don't know if anybody's ever used like the vacuum press coffee, but I've lost it recently, which is a little frustrating. So I'm like a sucker for little gizmos like this.
Gadgets.
Anytime I see one of these new gadgets and gizmos for coffee, I'm likely to buy it. My brother-in-law has this machine. It's called a spin coffee machine. It's the coolest thing ever. It's too rich for my blood. I'm not going to buy that, but it like talks to his phone. And so he can like, before leaving the warmth underneath his duvet, tells his coffee machine to like make him, a flat white, and it's waiting for him.
Oh my goodness.
Dude, it is a level that I have not yet arrived to, but I've
that sounds very interesting. So what is the Holy Spirit doing in your life at the moment? Doing or maybe saying to you or highlighting?
Around here, I very much believe that we're on the first little stages of what I hope will be, and what I think will be, a great revival that sweeps across our nation and what I believe will be the English-speaking world. And so for me in my life, you asked about me.
Yeah.
God's been talking to me a lot about what it takes to become the kind of person who can steward that well. The kind of personal holiness and humility and leadership that's required to, like, if God were to say yes to all my prayers, would I be able to handle that? Would I be able to steward that? Or would it be like catching water in my hands? And so a lot of what he's been dealing with me on, talking to me about, is, Adam, what's it going to take for you to be the kind of leader who can steward the kind of revival that you actually pray for all the time? So stuff like that.
Yeah, challenging stuff.
Yeah.
But good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The scary part is that my answer often is like, "Oh, no, Lord." I'm probably not quite there. We've just done a teaching series in Numbers, and I've found far too much of myself in the character of Moses than I would like to admit. I'm like, oh, I totally get why you're so frustrated. I would have done so much worse than him. So, yeah.
And now is this your first book that you've written? When God Seems
No.
Gone, have you done some others?
Yeah, I've written about 4 or 5, I believe. The first book I wrote was a book called Life and Doctrine, which is kind of an apologetic approach to the foundations of the faith, which actually came out of my ministry here. Teaching between Harvard and MIT, folks would come to our church and had a lot of questions about, like, who's God? How can I even know there's a God? Why is it reasonable to believe in Christianity? And so I developed this kind of content around helping people find and follow Jesus, which eventually turned into a book. Probably the most popular book I've written is called The Art of Rest, which came out of me crashing. Planting a church and like kind of doing graduate degrees and having a young family. I just kind of went and never stopped. And so then the Lord taught me about rest. And so that book is like, hey, I'm terrible at rest, but maybe you are too. Let's learn together. And so it's called The Art of Rest because, like many art forms, we're all bad at them when we start. So there it is. And then another book I wrote is called Stop Taking Sides. It's about a handful of tensions the Bible presents that are not theological problems to be solved, but tensions to be managed. Like the Bible presents the sovereignty of God alongside human responsibility, or passages about, victory right alongside suffering, or the coming kingdom right alongside like the nasty now and now. Like how did we deal with those things, and what are those tensions for? And my idea in that book is that the Bible is intentionally messing with us to develop our character. That was a fun book to write. So, and I'm working on a couple others. I finished my PhD about 18 months ago.
Oh, congratulations.
Around the doctrine of the Holy. Thank you. Around the doctrine of the Holy Spirit, and so I'm working on taking the things that I studied and putting them into language more than 2 people would want to read.
Yeah, that's always the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah. Someone's like, just publish what you wrote for your thesis. I'm like, no one wants to read that. That is very boring. Yes.
No, that sounds interesting. That sounds good.
Yeah.
And where can people find you on social media, etc.? And where can people buy your books?
Yeah, so you can buy my books anywhere books are sold. Most of my books are published with the Good Book company, but Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and if you Google Adam Mabry, you're going to get mostly me, and then also a semi-pro wrestler. That's not me. But you can find me on Instagram or on X or on Facebook. Just any of the same places. Just look for at Adam Mabry, or on Instagram it's at the Adam Mabry, because the other handle I believe was taken, or on my website, adammabry.org. And that's where I am. Or you could listen to my sermons from the Aletheia Church podcast.
Wonderful. I'll be putting a link to Adam's website in this episode's show notes. So if you want to find out more about him or connect with him or find his books, you can do that by clicking over there. Well, Adam, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been fascinating and wonderful speaking with you all about your book, When God Seems Gone. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks.
And thank you as well for listening to this episode of the Christian Book Blurb. I'll be back again really soon, speaking to another author all about their books, their life, and their faith to help you in your discipleship one book at a time. This podcast drops on the 1st and the 15th of each month. So do remember to come back soon and click on over to the Christian Book Blurb. Thank you so much. I look forward to having the pleasure of your company again really soon. Thank you and goodbye. Thanks for listening to Christian Book Blurb with your host, Matt McChlery. Do give it a like, give it a share, and let your friends know all about it. We do hope to see you again soon on another Christian Book Blurb.